The dying hum of Nexus Prime's life support systems echoed through the abandoned lower decks, like a mechanical death rattle, once a thriving trade hub connecting 3-star systems. The massive station now limped through space, half its section sealed off, the rest barely habitable. Most decent folk had moved on to newer, safer ports. What remained was a collection of drifters, criminals, and those too stubborn or too poor to leave. Marcus Kane fell into the stubborn category. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency across the plasma conduit housing, coaxing life back into systems that should have been scrapped decades ago. At 32, he had the kind of lean, weary build that came from years of crawling through maintenance shafts and the steady gray eyes of someone who'd seen enough of the galaxy's darker corners to appreciate simple honesty. His brown hair was perpetually tousled from pulling off his work cap, and his clothes bore the permanent stains of hydraulic fluid and coolant. The lower maintenance levels were his domain, a maze of pipes, cables, and forgotten storage compartments, where the station's original architects had hidden the infrastructure that kept everything running. Most people avoided these depths, put off by the oppressive atmosphere and the strange sounds that echoed through the metal corridors. Marcus found the solitude peaceful, which was why the soft scraping sound immediately caught his attention. He paused in his work, listening. There it was again, the quiet rasp of metal against metal, coming from somewhere deeper in the maze of storage compartments. His first thought was rats. The station had developed a serious vermin problem since the food processors in Section 7 had failed, but this sound was different, more deliberate. Marcus clipped his plasma torch to his tool belt and followed the noise through a narrow service corridor. The sound led him to a forgotten storage bay that hadn't been opened in years, its access panel dark and supposedly sealed, but the heavy door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see the faint glow of an emergency light. He pushed. The door opened slowly, the rusty hinges protesting with a low groan. Inside the cluttered storage bay, surrounded by crates of obsolete equipment and rolls of fiber optic cable, crouched the most unusual sight Marcus had encountered in his 5 years on Nexus Prime. A small figure, hunched over an open supply container, carefully sorting through discarded electronic components with delicate, four-fingered hands. At first glance, she might have been human, roughly the size and build of a teenage girl, but her skin held a subtle lavender hue that caught the emergency lighting, and her hair fell in silver-white cascades past her shoulders. When she looked up at his entrance, Marcus found himself staring into eyes the color of deep space dark, violet with tiny flecks of silver, like distant stars. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but what struck him most was the wariness in those extraordinary eyes. She reminded him of the feral cats that had haunted the docks of his home planet. Graceful, intelligent, but ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "Easy," Marcus said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl, for despite her alien features, something about her radiated youth and vulnerability, didn't flee. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with an intensity that made him feel as though she were reading his soul. In her hands, she clutched what looked like a partially dismantled power coupling, her fingers stained with the blue residue of energy cells. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, noting the hollowed look of her cheeks and the way her simple gray coveralls hung loose on her frame. A slight nod, barely perceptible. Marcus reached into his tool bag and pulled out the nutrition bar he'd been saving for his midday break. It wasn't much standard issue rations with all the flavor of recycled cardboard, but it was food. He placed it on a nearby crate and stepped back, giving her space. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "It's yours." She approached the offering with the same caution he'd seen in those dock cats, ready to snatch the food and disappear at the first wrong move. But when she took a small, experimental bite, her eyes widened in surprise. To someone surviving on scraps and discarded rations, even standard issue food must have tasted like a feast. "I'm Marcus," he said, settling himself on another crate to appear less threatening. "What's your name?" She chewed thoughtfully before answering in a voice like wind chimes, musical but barely above a whisper. "NYX, that's a pretty name. How long have you been living down here, Nix?" She held up her hand, fingers splayed. 5. Whether that meant days, weeks, or months, Marcus couldn't tell. But the sadness in her expression suggested it had been longer than any young person should have. To survive alone, where's your family? He asked gently. The change in her demeanor was immediate and heartbreaking. Those star-flecked eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall, and she shook her head with a finality that told Marcus everything he needed to know. She was alone in the universe, with only her wits and whatever technical skills had led her. To scavenge electronic components, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives. "Listen, Nix," he said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "I work maintenance on this station. It's honest work, and I know every bolt and circuit in this place. If you want, you could help me. I could use someone with small hands to reach the tight spaces, and you obviously know your way around electronics." Hope flickered in her eyes, followed immediately by suspicion. She'd been hurt before, Marcus realized. Probably more than once. "I have a small apartment in Section 4, he continued. "Nothing fancy, but it's warm and safe. You could stay there, help me with repairs during the day, and in return, you'd have food and a place to sleep. No strings attached, no tricks, just someone looking out for someone else." Nix studied his face for a long moment, those alien eyes seeming to look straight through to his intentions. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she gave another small nod. "Okay," she whispered, as Marcus led her through the winding corridors toward the inhabited sections of the station. He found himself wondering what circumstances had brought this remarkable girl to Nexus Prime. There was something about her that suggested she was far more than just another refugee. The way she moved with unconscious grace, the intelligence in her eyes, the careful precision with which she'd been sorting those components, everything about Nix hinted at secrets. But secrets could wait. Right now, she needed food, shelter, and someone to remind her that not everyone in the galaxy had abandoned kindness. And Marcus, who had spent too many years drifting through life without purpose, discovered that having someone to protect gave him something he'd forgotten he was missing: a reason to care about tomorrow. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus found Nix in the storage bay, and life on Nexus Prime had taken on a rhythm neither of them had expected. His small apartment in Section 4, once a sparse collection of basic furniture and repair manuals, had gradually transformed into something that felt almost like a home. Nix had proven to be an invaluable assistant. Her small stature allowed her to navigate the cramped maintenance shafts with ease, and her intuitive understanding of electronics often left Marcus amazed. She could diagnose problems with systems he'd been struggling with for hours, her four-fingered hands dancing across control panels as if she'd been born to work with advanced technology. More importantly, she'd begun to trust him. The transformation was subtle but profound. The wary, feral creature he'd first encountered had slowly given way to glimpses of someone remarkable. She asked questions about everything: how the station's artificial gravity worked, why humans needed so much sleep, what Earth was like. Her curiosity was infectious, reminding Marcus of wonders he'd taken for granted. But it was during the quiet evenings in his apartment that he glimpsed the person she truly was beneath the survival instincts. When she thought he wasn't looking, Nix would stand at the small viewport, gazing out at the stars with an expression of such profound longing that it made his chest ache. There were depths to her that she kept carefully hidden, layers of pain and loss that she wasn't ready to share. On this particular evening, they sat across from each other at Marcus's small dining table, sharing a meal of synthesized protein and reconstituted vegetables. Nix had learned to use human utensils with the same quick adaptation she showed for everything else, though she still preferred to eat with her hands when she thought he wasn't watching. "Marcus," she said suddenly, her musical voice breaking the comfortable silence, "why did you help me?" He looked up from his food, surprised by the directness of the question. In the weeks they'd been living together, she'd never asked about his motivations. "You needed help," he said simply. "Someone had to. But why you?" she pressed, those star-flecked eyes studying his face. "Most humans on this station would have reported me to security or ignored me entirely. Why risk taking in a stranger?" Marcus set down his fork, considering his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in his own history of loss and the recognition he'd seen in her eyes that first day. "I had a sister once," he said finally. "Her name was Emma. She was about your age." When he paused, the old pain still sharp after all these years. "Pirates attacked our colony transport when I was 25. Emma and I got separated during the evacuation. I spent 3 years searching for her, following every lead, checking every refugee center in the sector." Nix's expression softened with understanding. "I never found her," Marcus continued, "but I met a lot of other lost souls during those searches. Kids who'd been separated from their families, people who'd lost everything and had nowhere to go. I saw what happened to the ones who didn't have anyone to help them." He met her gaze directly. "When I found you in that storage bay, I saw Emma. Or maybe I saw who she might have become if someone hadn't helped her." Nix reached across the table and touched his hand with her four-fingered grip. Her skin was warm, softer than human skin, with a subtle texture that reminded him of silk. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry about whatever brought you here alone," he replied. "You don't have to tell me about it until you're ready. But I want you to know you're safe here. Whatever happened before, you're not alone anymore." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the careful walls she'd built around herself. For a moment, Marcus thought she might tell him everything, the secrets behind those intelligent eyes, the reason she sometimes woke from nightmares speaking in a language he didn't recognize, the way she seemed to know things about the stations, systems that she shouldn't. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently and smiled, the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her. "Thank you," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by a sharp chime from Marcus's communication terminal. He frowned, glancing at the chronometer on the wall. It was late for official station business. "Kane here," he said, activating the comm. "Unit, Marcus, thank the void I reached you." The voice belonged to Jorik, a Zephyrian who ran a small cantina in Section 6. His usually jovial tone was strained with worry. "I need your help. Friend, my environmental controls are failing, and if I can't get them fixed tonight, I'll lose everything in my cold storage." Marcus glanced at Nix, who had already begun gathering their repair tools with efficient movements. She'd grown to enjoy their evening repair calls, the more challenging the better. "We'll be right there, Jorik," Marcus said. The cantina was nearly empty when they arrived, just a few late-night drinkers nursing synthetic alcohol at the bar. Jorik himself was a fascinating sight, tall and willowy with pale blue skin and large, multifaceted eyes that could see across a broader spectrum than human vision. His species was known for their diplomatic nature and their exceptional ability to read emotional states, which made them natural bartenders and mediators. "Marcus, my friend," Jorik exclaimed, his relief evident, "and the lovely Nix. I swear, you two are becoming quite the team." Marcus noticed the way Jorik's large eyes lingered on Nix with something beyond casual interest. The Zephyrian had always been friendly, but there was a quality to his attention that suggested he saw more than he was letting on. While Marcus began diagnosing the environmental system's failures, Nix worked on the cantina's other systems with her usual quiet efficiency. But Marcus found himself watching the interaction between her and Jorik with growing curiosity. The Zephyrian spoke to Nix in soft, respectful tones that bordered on reverence. At one point, Marcus caught him offering her a small bow, subtle but unmistakably formal. When Nix responded with what looked like a gracious nod, Marcus felt a chill of recognition. There was something regal about the exchange, a quality of acknowledged status that he'd been too close to see before. As they worked late into the station's artificial night cycle, Marcus found his mind racing with questions. Who was Nix, really? And more importantly, why did a Zephyrian bartender treat a young refugee with the deference usually reserved for nobility? The answers, he suspected, would change everything between them. But as he watched Nix work with quiet concentration, her silver hair catching the cantina's dim lighting, Marcus realized that whatever secrets she carried, they only made him more determined to protect her. In the depths of space, surrounded by the dregs of civilization on a dying station, he'd found something precious beyond measure. Not just someone to protect, but someone who made him want to be worthy of her trust. And if that trust came with dangerous secrets, Well, Marcus had never been one to choose the easy path anyway. The first sign of trouble came in the form of silence. Marcus had been working on a particularly stubborn power coupling in Section 3 when he realized he hadn't heard from Nix in over an hour. In the month they'd been working together, she'd developed a habit of checking in regularly, her musical voice calling updates from whatever cramped maintenance shaft she'd squeezed into. The absence of that familiar sound made his chest tighten with unease. "Nix," he called, his voice echoing through the empty corridor. "Status report." No answer. Marcus dropped his tools and began retracing their planned route through the section. They'd split up to cover more ground, a routine they'd established dozens of times before. But as he moved through the familiar passages, a growing sense of wrongness settled over him like a cold fog. He found her tools first, scattered across the floor of a service junction. As if they'd been dropped in haste, her small work bag lay nearby, its contents spilled across the metal grating. Marcus knelt beside the scattered equipment, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What happened here?" he muttered, scanning the area for any clue. "Your little friend ran into some complications," a gravelly voice said behind him. Marcus spun around to find himself facing a figure that belonged in his worst nightmares. The being before him stood nearly 7 feet tall, with the characteristic dark gray skin and predatory build of a Korthic bounty hunter. Bony ridges crowned his skull, and his eyes were the flat black of a deep space predator. A collection of advanced weapons hung from his utility harness, each one worth more than Marcus made in a year. Keth Voss, the hunter, introduced himself with casual menace. "I believe you have something that belongs to my client." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, slowly reaching for the plasma cutter on his belt. Keth's laugh was like grinding metal. The Ashanti girl, silver hair, violet eyes, about this tall. He held his hand at shoulder height. "Goes by Nix, though I doubt that's her real name." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. My client prefers live deliveries." When possible, Keth stepped closer, his movements predatorily graceful. "Here's what's going to happen, human. You're going to walk away and forget you ever met her. In return, I don't space you through the nearest airlock." The plasma cutter was in Marcus's hand now, its familiar weight reassuring despite the impossible odds. "Counteroffer, you tell me where she is, and I don't fry your ugly face off." Keth's expression shifted to something resembling amusement. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Marcus Kane, maintenance tech, age 32, originally from Kepler Colony, lost your sister to pirates and came to this rotting station to drink yourself to death. The hunter's black eyes glittered with malice. "I know everything about you, human, including the fact that you're completely outmatched." Before Marcus could react, Keth moved with inhuman speed. A stunning blast from the hunter's sidearm sent electricity coursing through Marcus's body, dropping him to his knees as his muscles spasmed uncontrollably. The plasma cutter clattered across the floor, far beyond his reach. "Consider this a professional courtesy," Keth said, standing over Marcus's twitching form. "Most hunters would have killed you already, but I have a reputation for clean work, and unnecessary deaths are messy." As the stunning effect began to wear off, Marcus forced himself to focus through the pain. "Who wants her? Why? Questions above your pay grade, human." Keth turned to leave, then paused. "Though I will say this, your little friend is worth more alive than most planets' annual GDP. Someone very important wants her back." The hunter's heavy footsteps echoed away down the corridor, leaving Marcus alone with his racing thoughts and the taste of ozone in his mouth. He lay on the cold metal floor for several minutes, waiting for full feeling to return to his limbs, his mind working furiously. Nix was worth more than planets. Someone important wanted her back. The pieces of a puzzle he'd been unconsciously assembling for weeks suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The way Jorek treated her with subtle deference, her intuitive understanding of advanced technology, the nightmares she wouldn't talk about, the careful way she spoke, as if every word were being weighed for its political implications. Marcus had been harboring royalty. Once he could move again, he struggled to his feet and began making his way through the station's maintenance corridors with new purpose. If Keth had taken Nix, There were only a few places on Nexus Prime where a bounty hunter could hold a high-value prisoner. While arranging transport, the old detention cells in Section 9 had been abandoned years ago, but they still had power and artificial atmosphere. It was the logical choice for someone who needed to keep a captive secure but alive. Marcus had never considered himself a hero. He fixed things: pipes, circuits, environmental systems, problems with clear solutions and predictable outcomes. But as he made his way through the twisting passages toward Section 9, he realized that some things were worth breaking all the rules for. The detention area was exactly as he remembered from his first tour of the station 5 years ago. A collection of reinforced holding cells designed to contain the worst criminals. In 3-star systems, most stood empty now, their security fields disabled to save power. But light spilled from one cell at the far end of the corridor, and Marcus could hear voices. He crept closer, using the shadows between cells for cover. "Don't understand the significance of what you're carrying," Keth was saying, his gravelly voice echoing off the metal walls. "But my client does. They've been looking for you for a very long time. Princess, princess." Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed sent shock waves through his understanding of everything that had happened. "Between them, I'm not going back," Nix's voice replied, clear and strong despite her circumstances. "Whatever they're offering you, it's not worth the war that will follow." "War?" Keth sounded intrigued. "My client mentioned you might say that. Something about preventing a peace treaty, keeping old grudges alive. Politics bore me, girl. I just deliver packages." Marcus edged closer, trying to get a visual on the cell's interior. Through the gap between the security barrier and the wall, he could see Nix sitting on the narrow bench, her hands bound behind her back with electromagnetic restraints. But her posture was straight, proud every inch the royal she apparently was. "The treaty would save millions of lives," Nix said quietly. "The war between our peoples has gone on too long. There has to be a better way forward." Touching sentiment. "You can discuss it with my client during your journey home." Marcus had heard enough. A dozen desperate plans ran through his mind, each one more likely to get them both killed than the last. But as he watched Nix sit with quiet dignity in that cell, he realized that the woman he'd been falling in love with was exactly who he'd thought she was, just with a much more complicated past. And if she was willing to risk war to prevent more bloodshed, then she was worth risking everything to save. Marcus began checking his tool belt, taking inventory of everything that might serve as a weapon or distraction. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but he knew this station better than anyone alive. If he was going to rescue a princess from a professional bounty hunter, he'd have to use every advantage he had, starting with the fact that Keth probably didn't know about the old emergency protocols in Section 9. The ones that could flood the entire detention area with firefighting foam on command. As Marcus crept toward the environmental controls, he found himself smiling grimly. Sometimes the best solutions were the simplest ones. Time to show a bounty hunter what happened when someone threatened Marcus Kane's family. The firefighting foam erupted from every ventilation grate in Section 9, with the force of a small explosion, filling the detention area with thick, white suppressant that reduced visibility to mere inches. Marcus heard Keth's roar of rage and confusion echo through the chaos, followed by the distinctive whine of energy weapons firing blindly into the foam. Marcus had counted on the hunter's first instinct being to eliminate the threat, rather than secure the prisoner. It was a calculated risk that paid off within seconds of activating the emergency system. He heard the distinctive sound of electromagnetic restraints disengaging as the security systems automatically released all prisoners during a fire emergency. "Nix," he called out, his voice muffled by the thick foam. "This way, Marcus." Her voice came from somewhere to his left, filled with relief and something else, surprise that he'd come for her at all. He followed the sound through the artificial blizzard, his hands outstretched until they found her familiar form. She was soaked in suppressant foam, her silver hair plastered to her head, but her star-flecked eyes blazed with determination. "Can you move?" he asked, checking her for injuries. Double quotes, yes, but her response was cut off by the sound of heavy footsteps. splashing through the foam behind them. "Run," Marcus said. Grabbing her hand, they fled through the detention area. As energy blasts scorched the air around them, Keth's furious bellows following in their wake, Marcus led them through a maintenance hatch he'd spotted during his reconnaissance, into the service corridors that honeycombed the station like arteries. Behind them, the foam began to dissipate as the emergency systems switched to evacuation mode. They had minutes before Keth would be able to track them properly. "This way," Marcus whispered, guiding Nix through passages so narrow they had to move single file. "There's someone who can help us." 20 minutes later, they emerged in the back room of a small trading post in Section 7, startling a woman who'd been cataloging inventory in the dim light. Vera Thorne looked up from her data pad with the sharp-eyed wariness of someone who'd survived too many years on the galaxy's fringes. "Marcus Kane," she said, taking in their foam-covered appearance with raised eyebrows. "I take it this isn't a social call." Vera was one of the few people on Nexus Prime that Marcus trusted completely, a former military pilot who'd turned to trading after a battle injury left her with a permanent limp. She dealt in information as much as goods. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her dark eyes missed nothing. "We need passage off-station," Marcus said without preamble. "Tonight, no questions asked. That kind of request comes with a premium price." Vera replied, but her attention was focused on Nix with growing interest, especially when it involves running from Keth Voss. "Yes, I know he's here. Word travels fast in my business." Nix stepped forward, meeting Vera's scrutiny with quiet dignity. "I can pay whatever price you name, but not in credits." "What then?" Instead of answering, Nix moved to Vera's workbench and picked up a piece of obsolete navigation equipment that had been marked for scrap. Her four-fingered hands moved across its surface with practiced precision, and within moments, the dead device hummed to life with capabilities that exceeded its original specifications. Vera's eyes widened. "How did you? That's adaptive nanotechnology. The kind of upgrade that costs more than this entire station." "My people developed it centuries ago," Nix said simply. "I can upgrade every piece of tech in your inventory, make you the richest trader in the sector. All I ask is safe passage to the rebel sanctuary at Epsilon Station." "And why would a young woman with that kind of knowledge be running from bounty hunters?" Marcus and Nix exchanged glances. In the hours since Keth's revelation, they hadn't had time to talk about what it meant. The careful walls she'd built around her past had been shattered, leaving them both navigating unfamiliar territory. "Because," Nix said quietly, "I'm the exiled princess of the Ashanti Collective, and there are people who want to use me to restart a war that's already claimed too many lives." Vera leaned back in her chair, whistling softly. "Well, that explains the price on your head. Also explains why you've been living in the maintenance tunnels instead of the royal suite." She studied Nix with new respect. "The Ashanti peace treaty negotiations. You're the princess who disappeared during the summit on Arcturus Prime." "I didn't disappear," Nix said, her voice hardening. "I was smuggled out by people who believed peace was more important than politics. The hardliners on both sides wanted the negotiations to fail. They needed the princess to vanish so they could blame the other faction and justify renewed hostilities." Marcus felt the pieces of her story clicking into place. The nightmares, the careful way she spoke about the past, the profound sadness he'd glimpsed when she thought he wasn't looking. "So you've been hiding," he said, "letting everyone think you were dead rather than become a pawn in someone else's war. Until someone tracked me down anyway." Nix's shoulders sagged slightly. "I should have kept running. Should never have stayed in one place long enough." She glanced at Marcus, her expression vulnerable. "To let myself care about someone." The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all their weeks together, she'd never spoken about feelings, about what was growing between them. He'd begun to wonder if the connection he felt was entirely one-sided. "Nix," he began, but she shook her head. "Don't you understand? Being near me puts you in danger. Keth is just the first. There will be others, and they won't all be as professional about collateral damage." Vera cleared her throat. "Diplomatically, while this is touching, we have more immediate concerns. Keth isn't working alone." My sources say there's a collective warship holding position just outside scanner range, waiting for his signal. Marcus felt his blood chill. How long do we have? Maybe 6 hours before they realize something's gone wrong and come looking. Vera stood. Decision made. I have a fast courier ship docked in Bay 12. It's not much to look at, but it can outrun anything the collective has in this sector. You'd risk war with the collective for us? Nix asked. Vera's smile was sharp as a blade. Honey, I've been at war with one faction or another my entire adult life. Besides, she gestured to the upgraded navigation device. You just made me a very wealthy woman. I can afford to take some risks. As Vera began preparing for departure, Marcus pulled Nix aside. The foam had dried in her silver hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance in the trading post's dim lighting. We need to talk, he said quietly. Marcus, I know. He placed his hands on her shoulders, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin through the damp fabric of her coveralls. You don't get to make decisions about my safety for me. I'm an adult, and I choose to help you, whatever the risk. Her star-flecked eyes searched his face. You don't understand what you're saying. I'm not just some refugee you rescued. I'm a political liability that could destroy everything you've built here. What I've built here. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. NYX. Before I found you, I was slowly drinking myself to death in a maintenance bay on a dying station. You gave me purpose, gave me something to care about. You think I'm going to walk away from that because it's dangerous? People die around me, Marcus. Everyone I've ever cared about ends up paying the price for my existence. Then it's time to stop running and start fighting back. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't seem to realize she was shedding. You said yourself that peace is worth fighting for. Maybe it's time to stop hiding and start working toward the future you actually want. For a moment, something blazed in her eyes: hope, determination, and something else that made his heart race. You really mean that? She whispered, every word, without warning. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle at first, hesitant, as if she were afraid he might pull away. When he deepened the kiss instead. His arms coming around her to pull her closer, she melted against him with a soft sound of relief. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vera's voice carried across the trading post. Hate to interrupt, but we need to move. Keth's been asking questions in the Cantina district, and it won't take him long to work his way here. As they gathered their few possessions and prepared to leave Nexus Prime behind, Marcus realized that everything in his life was about to change. He was running away with an exiled princess to a rebel sanctuary, abandoning the simple existence he'd built for himself, and he'd never been happier about anything in his life. The rebel sanctuary at Epsilon Station was nothing like Marcus had expected. Instead of the ramshackle collection of makeshift habitats he'd imagined, Epsilon turned out to be a marvel of engineering. A massive space habitat built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, its interior transformed into a garden world complete with artificial sky, flowing rivers, and forests that stretched to the curved horizon. Welcome to the last free port in the galaxy, Vera said as their courier ship settled onto a landing pad carved from living rock. The Epsilon Collective has been building this place for the better part of a century. It's where people come when they're tired of choosing sides in other people's wars. Through the ship's viewport, Marcus could see beings from dozens of species moving through the landing area with purposeful efficiency. But what struck him most was the atmosphere. Despite the obvious military preparation, there was something hopeful about the place, a sense of possibility that had been entirely absent from Nexus Prime. It's beautiful, Nix breathed, her star-flecked eyes wide with wonder. She'd been quiet during the 3-day journey from Nexus Prime, processing everything that had changed between them. Marcus had given her space, understanding that decades of hiding don't disappear overnight. But he'd caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, something warm and wondering in her expression. They were met at the landing pad by a woman who moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. She was tall and elegant, with the distinctive bronze skin and silver hair of the Altarian species. Her clothing was practical but well-made, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who'd earned respect rather than inherited it. Princess Siriana, she said, offering Nyx a formal bow that somehow managed to convey both respect and warmth. I am Talia Brightstar, administrator of Epsilon Station. We've been hoping for this day for a very long time. Marcus started at the name. In all their weeks together, he'd never heard Nyx's real name. Siriana suited her. It had the same musical quality as her voice. Just Nyx, please, she replied with a slight smile. I left the princess behind on Arcturus Prime, as you wish, though I hope you'll consider reclaiming that title when you're ready. The galaxy needs leaders who understand that peace is worth more than power. As they walked through the station's welcoming corridors, Talia explained Epsilon's purpose. It had been founded by refugees and idealists from across the galaxy, people who believed that the endless cycle of war between the major powers was ultimately futile. We're not pacifists, she clarified as they entered a comfortable residential district that felt more like a small town than a space station. But we believe conflict should have purpose beyond perpetuating itself. The Collective Federation War has been raging for 50 years. And what has it accomplished besides making weapons manufacturers wealthy? They were given quarters in a section, reserved for distinguished guests, a small apartment with a real window that looked out over one of the station's internal lakes. It was modest but comfortable. And after weeks of living in Marcus's cramped maintenance quarters, it felt palatial. There's someone who wants to meet you, Talia told Nyx as they settled in. Ambassador Quinn arrived yesterday. He's been following the peace negotiations closely. Marcus saw Nyx tense at the mention of the ambassador. Which faction does he represent? Neither, or both, depending on how you look at it. Talia's smile was enigmatic. He's one of the original architects of the peace process, before politics got in the way. I think you'll find him interesting. That evening, they met Ambassador Quinn in Epsilon's central garden, a vast space filled with plants from hundreds of worlds. The ambassador was an elderly human with kind eyes and silver hair, but Marcus recognized the sharp intelligence behind his grandfatherly demeanor. Your Highness, he said, rising from a bench beside a fountain that sparkled with bioluminescent water. Or may I call you Nyx? I understand you prefer the name you chose for yourself. Nyx is fine, she replied, though Marcus noticed she carried herself differently here, straighter, more confident. Being around people who knew her true identity seemed to be awakening something that had been dormant. Good. I've always believed that we should be allowed to define ourselves rather than be defined by our circumstances. Quinn gestured for them to sit. I wanted to thank you personally for the sacrifice you've made these past months. Disappearing couldn't have been easy. It was necessary, Nyx said simply. The hardliners on both sides needed someone to blame for the failed negotiations. Better they think me dead than use me as a rallying cry for renewed warfare. And yet here you are, very much alive and sitting in a place that represents everything those negotiations were meant to achieve. Quinn's eyes twinkled. Perhaps it's time to consider whether your exile has served its purpose. Marcus felt Nyx stiffen beside him. What do you mean? The political situation has changed dramatically. In recent months, the moderates are gaining ground on both sides, partly because the hardliners have overplayed their hand. People are tired of war, Nyx. They're ready for the kind of leadership you represent. I represent nothing, Nyx said firmly. I'm an exile, without a home, without political standing. Even if I wanted to return to public life, which I don't, I have no authority to negotiate anything. Quinn smiled. That's where you're wrong. Your disappearance created a power vacuum that the moderates have been working to fill. Your cousin Thane has been serving as regent, and he's managed to build a coalition that actually wants peace. He's been waiting for you to return so he can formally transfer power back to the rightful heir. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not only was Nyx royalty, but she was apparently the key to ending a war that had raged for half a century. I can't, she whispered. I won't be a pawn in someone else's political game again. No one's asking you to be a pawn, Quinn said gently. They're asking you to be a queen, on your own terms with your own vision for the future. That night, Marcus and Nyx walked through Epsilon's gardens in comfortable silence, both processing the weight of what they'd learned. The artificial stars overhead created a canopy of soft light, that made the flowing water seem to glow. "You're going back, aren't you?" Marcus said finally. Nick stopped beside a grove of earth willows, their trailing branches creating a natural alcove. "I don't know. 6 months ago, the answer would have been no without hesitation. But now," she turned to face him, her expression vulnerable, "everything's changed. Because of what the ambassador said. Because of you." She stepped closer, her hands finding his. "You saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You made me remember that I'm more than just a political symbol or a victim of circumstance." Marcus felt his heart clench. "And now you have to decide between duty and what you want for yourself." "That's just it," she said softly. "For the first time in my life, they might be the same thing. I want peace, Marcus. I want children to grow up in a galaxy where their biggest worry is what career to choose, not which faction will conscript them. I want to build something better than what we inherited." He cupped her face in his hands, seeing the woman she truly was, not the frightened refugee he'd found scavenging in storage bays, but a leader capable of changing the course of history. "Then do it," he said simply. "Build the future you want to see." "Come with me," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it's asking too much, asking you to leave everything behind for a life you never chose." But he silenced her with a kiss, pouring everything he felt into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "NYX Rihanna, whoever you choose to be," he said quietly. "I fell in love with the person you are, not the title you carry. Wherever you go, whatever you choose to do, I want to be part of it." She smiled then, the radiant expression of someone who'd finally found her way home. "In that case," she said, "I believe you're about to become the first human consort in Ashanti collective history." As they stood together in the garden of a rebel sanctuary, surrounded by the promise of peace and the possibility of love, Marcus realized that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness. He'd offered a hungry girl a nutrition bar, and she'd given him a galaxy full of hope. 3 months later, Princess Rihanna returned to Ashanti space not as an exile, but as a queen. By her side stood Marcus Kane, no longer a maintenance worker, but a consort who'd chosen love over safety and found both. The peace treaty they negotiated became known as the Epsilon Accords, and it ushered in an era of prosperity that lasted for generations. But those who knew them best always said that the real miracle wasn't the end of the war. It was the love story that made it possible. Sometimes, after all, the greatest acts of diplomacy happen not in council chambers, but in the quiet moments when one person sees another's true worth and chooses to protect it, no matter the cost.